David came to us in Southern California just last year, right?
Yeah.
Just last year, having spent his rabbinate until this point in Berkeley. David joined the team at IKAR and is the associate rabbi at IKAR and oversees adult learning and works closely with their tribe of 20s and 30s groups. Prior to that, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit yourself, I can read the bio, but no need, but has just done a ton of work at both as the senior educator at Berkeley Hillel and as the senior rabbinic educator at Keva in Berkeley, also doing more adult education, lifelong learning. He's a rabbi, he's an attorney, has a background in poli-sci, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot more to it than that.
Parshanot?
And what?
Parshanot.
And Parshanot!
Yes.
And David Kasher.
All around great guy, David Kasher. Thanks, it's a real honor to be here at a little intimidating teaching in front of my colleagues like this, and hopefully we'll all just be able to learn together. I'm not the rabbi in the room, obviously. So we were assigned, or at least I was assigned, little units from little excerpts from Unetane Tokef, and the one I got was Mi Bacher Mi Bachaya, and I was excited is the wrong word, but I was pleased to get that one, who by sword and who by wild beast. I was pleased to get that in particular because of the story behind Unetane Tokef, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, which is that it's told over in a book called the Or Zarua, a halachic sefer from Germany, 13th century book that Rav Amnon of Mainz, a German rabbi who we don't know much about except for this story. But the story goes that the Archbishop of Mainz was pressuring Rav Amnon to convert to Catholicism. Not pressuring, that's like too light a word. Was threatening him that he convert to Catholicism or die. And Rav Amnon didn't know what to do. It's like one of these like things that I always think with like Yareg Val Yavor, where you're supposed to die for these things, and you know, I think I would die before killing someone or committing an act of incest or something. But if someone asked me to convert or die, I'm not sure what I would do. Like, I'm not sure that one feels hard, and Rav Amnon must have felt that for a second too, because he asked for 3 days to think about it. And then the story goes that he was so ashamed that he had even considered it that he spent the 3 days in sort of agony, and at the end he said, "Absolutely not, I will not convert, and you should please cut my tongue out for having even uttered a consideration." Archbishop did not like that solution, so he did not cut his tongue out, but instead cut his limbs off one by one. And then Rabbi Amnon eventually died from the bleeding, but is said to have composed this piyut, this liturgy that has become so famous as he was sort of fading away. Which is to say that of all the things that he mentions, the phrase that we're going to be looking at today is the one that he died of. Right? Mi Bacher was Rav Amnon. He died by the sword. And so I want to put that in our heads as we look at this and try to think a little bit what he might have been thinking when he wrote these words. By the way, there's a debate over whether this story, maybe the source is even earlier, and we don't know if it was him, but in as much as that is the classic story, I'd like to think about what Rav Amnon might have been thinking as he reflected on dying by the sword. But as I said earlier, I also think that this is an important touch point for us in this view, because it is the who will die by that most speaks to dying at the hands of another in a violent act, and that is, unfortunately, I mean, in some sense, it's something that humans have always been dealing with, but it is unfortunately something that we are dealing with in a really prominent and terrifying way right now in this country, and that we as Jews are dealing with in a particular way that the author of this view also had some sense of. Okay, so with that as an introduction, I'm gonna pass this out. Let's look at let's look at the view itself. Thanks so much. And then we'll drill down a little bit, but let's just like familiarize. This is like so familiar to us, but let's just look at it as a piece of text, as a kind of a poem, because it is also poetic. It's written as a view and meant to communicate something, but also to have a certain kind of rhythm to it. So I'll wait till we get past that. Okay, I'll start to read in Hebrew and then maybe somebody will read in English. Rosh Hashanah yikatevun, ubiyom tzom kippur yichatemun, kami yavrun v'chami yibareun, mi yichyev umi yamut, mi b'kitz'o umi lo b'kitz'o, mi b'mayim umi ba'esh, mi b'cherev umi b'chaya, mi b'rav umi b'tzama, mi b'rash umi b'magefa, mi b'chanika umi b'skila, mi anuach umi anua, mi yishaket umi taref, mi yishalev umi yityasar, mi yani umi yasher, mi yishafel umi yarum, utshuva utfila utzdaka mavirim et roat hagezera. Leila, do you do me a favor and read the English?
Rosh Hashanah will be inscribed, and on Yom Kippur will be sealed. How many will pass from the earth, and how many will be created? Who will live, and who will die? Who will die after a long life, and who before their time? Who by water, and who by fire? Who by sword, and who by wild beast? Who by famine, and who by thirst? Who by upheaval, and who by plague? Who by strangling, and who by stoning? Who will rest, and who will wander? Who will live in harmony, and who will be harried? Who will enjoy tranquility, and who will suffer? Who will be impoverished, and who will be enriched? Who will be degraded, and who will be exalted? But repentance, prayer, and charity annul the severe decree.
So, okay, this is a famous prayer. It is also a poem of sorts, right? So what is the poetic, let's just speak it out. I'll ask some obvious questions to begin with. How is the poem organized? What's the structure here? So we have it on the table. It's the basic structure. Yeah.
So there's a lot of alliterations or almost homophones in terms of the wording. And then there's a lot of parallels or opposites.
Good. Okay. Good. So what's your name?
Ehud.
Ehud is taking us to these couplets. It's organized in couplets. There's just a series of couplets listed, and there's some relationship between them. So maybe they sound similar. There's some alliteration to them, and maybe they're also sort of suggesting kind of dialogue with one another because they're what? How are they related to each other? I see another hand over there.
They're opposites.
They're opposites. A lot of them are opposites, right? Who by fire and who by water. Who in tranquility and who in suffering. Do you have another thought?
I was going to say that the first few are God or faith or natural, and the second half seems to be more human induced, whether it's your own, inner tranquility or whatever, or somebody doing something to you.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. I didn't notice that, and that sounds right. And if it's true, when does it transition?
Right around the time that you have your particular version.
Yeah, it could be that's a transition moment. I mean, like who by water and who by fire still seems like what we call in law an act of God, right? So God decreeing these things, where suddenly the sword comes in, and that's a turning point, because that's God may have allowed. We have various theologies out there, ones in which God may allow something to happen, but this at least requires a human agent. So there's a transition point there. Yeah.
Well, and shortly after that, you get this switch, where the first ones are all listed ways that one might die, and though they're listed in pairs, the homophones are interesting, but it's still, could you die essentially by A or B? And then as you get to later parts, it's more choices, who will be in good condition of one kind versus bad condition. Like the idea of living safely versus torment, or poor versus rich. The choices actually become really
Yeah. Oh, that's nice too. That's nice too. And in this sense, mi b'cherev and mi b'chaya is in the first category, which is here are two terrible ways to die. Okay. Okay. So good work so far. That working was like a strong.
I couldn't hear what.
So what Adam said is that in the beginning we're listing two perhaps opposite ways to die, but they're both terrible ways to die. Whereas by the end we're starting to reflect on how you might prefer to be in tranquility or to be rich than to be harried or poor. Yeah.
I see this as the first part is how we could die. The second part is how we could live. Right, there's a transition.
Right, so that builds on that same kind of transition.
The second half doesn't talk about death at all, does it?
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. Like,
No, that's not. What's written by stoning, that's not.
that's true. I think the point you're making is that this also might reflect on, at the point of your death, whether you died in this particular way, this might be the state of affairs. Some of the things that are listed there, right?
Once you get to Hulu Rest and Hulu Lander, everything there, from there on in, is about ways to live.
That's right.
Do you want to live as if you're dead, or do you want to live and thrive?
Okay, great. I've done a great job of getting a basic structure here. Now let's think a little bit about this phrase. Is this phrase, we said that it is in the former category in the sense that it is both bad ways to die, and that we also said these the whole list seems to be a series of opposites. So let's think about is this first of all, are these opposites? What does that mean to say that sword and wild beasts are two opposing ways to die? If that's the structure we've been working with.
Well, human-made weapon versus being, attacked by a bear or a wolf.
Okay, good. Okay, so that seems to be the distinction that's being made. One is deliberate, intentional human, and the other, I don't know how to let's make a list. If human, intentional, violent, with a weapon on one side, animal, and then what's the experience or the feeling of that kind of death? How would we describe that kind of death? Natural, like there's something. It's also a little bit like water and fire. There's something like an act of, like a pack of wild beasts attacks you. I guess they mean to, but it feels like a force of nature. Yeah.
Okay. I don't surf as much as I used to, but thinking about getting eaten by a shark does cross my mind periodically, and there's nothing I find comforting or redeeming in that methodology of death. So when you say no, it's an animal. Animals act like animals. This is what they do. The shark is not doing it out of a sense of evil. It's doing it because it's a shark, and sharks eat, and they eat flesh. And that's why I diet constantly to look less appealing to them.
Yeah, I mean, this is we sort of helpfully had the distinction we made between the first part of this piyut, in which both deaths are bad, and the second, in which there's some kind of like, I prefer this over this. This is in the both deaths are bad part, but is there some way in which one is preferable? Is it like you were just saying, I won't be attacked by shark. Is there some sense in which we can rank these two or think about them in some kind of order? So,
I was thinking about that, but I want to say something else. We usually use chaya, wild beast, as a way to or animals. We call people animals.
Right, build the chaya.
Build the chaya when we want to dehumanize them. So I see the contrast between the Huay sword, because sword is a tool, and we are humans and we make tools, and we've been very effective at creating tools of death. And the contrast with that is that dehumanizing, the victim and the perpetrator in these two images that are presented here. And I don't know, even by the sword, you have to dehumanize the other to be able to take the other's life. But I don't know, it was in my mind.
Okay, so that's helpful. Okay, so let's just, for Daniel, right?
Yeah.
What Daniel's saying about Chaya as a category is that there's something dehumanizing about the whole process. That is to say, not only is it not a human that is attacking, but the human that is attacking, you then become food, prey, a piece of meat, rather than an object of hatred that one person is able to focus on. And then you're suggesting, and that category also might be used more metaphorically. That there is we could describe an attack by a person as a kind of a wild animal-like attack, and that dehumanizes the perpetrator, but we still have the dehumanization of the victim. Okay. So we're beginning to fill out the characters of these two categories. So there's something about the wild animal category that is dehumanizing, chaotic, natural, not in the sense that it ought to happen, but that it emerges from the forces of nature, whereas the sword is deliberate, hate-driven, intentional, focused. Okay, yeah.
I'm looking at this one and it feels like it's out of place, and it feels like this is one that's out of sync in the midst of all the rest of them.
Why do you think?
Because it does feel like the first half is about things that happen in the natural world that are amoral. And then the second half comes into, once you switch to who by strangling, who by stoning, then these are unnatural things. These are things that happen with a human being that have to do with human conflict. The first half is not human conflict. It's human, it's our intercourse with nature. But who by sword is human interaction. Who by beast is not. That's both nature. And I'm also thinking, as I look at the word swords, I contemplate this. What seems to be missing from here is war. And I'm wondering whether sword is a metaphor for war. Because a human being in violence with another human being probably is not going to use a sword, they're going to use something else. We use swords in war. And I sort of wonder whether in his world, whether he was putting the category of war as an inevitability of nature, just like plagues and fire, there's going to be wars.
Okay, great. That's all very helpful. This is a unique contrast. We haven't seen what we've been saying so far, that one is orchestrated by human beings and the other one seems to be a part of the wild. That's a distinction we haven't seen before. And you're also right to say that cherev is a category that represents a lot more than just being poked with a sword, a lot more than just one person killing, but a whole category of these are the implements of war. To die by the sword is to die by massacre, by invasion, right? That's part of the so it is a unique contrast, and it also, one of those is, I don't say familiar, but it's a recurring to say to die by the sword is to say to die by violence, to die by war. What is it to say to die by wild animal? Or let me ask this question, just to see this before we kind of go deeper textually. I want to keep in mind the larger picture that we're trying to reflect back on. These mass shootings that we are experiencing almost daily now in our country, are those sword or are those wild animals?
Vegan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm in toward a non-vegan answer as well, and part of it for me is that when we see the switch to who by sword, these are things that our interaction with each other in the natural world has an impact on. Not just the sword, but the famine and the thirst and upheaval or the way we interact with the natural world can either create space for wild beasts to do their thing without impacting us, or can bring us closer to them as we take over habitats and This made me think of climate change, actually, and the ways that human interaction and agency does then bring about perhaps more famine, or more thirst, or more negative interactions with predatory creatures.
So that's interesting. You're sort of filling out the Hayat category and saying, like all forces of nature, you drown if you're near water. Like there's a certain, you can be mindful of those things and maybe avoid them. So there's a way in which that's less chaotic because it's about, like there's a strategy there too. But again, I want to ask, the kinds of public violence that we are witnessing today, are they chaotic? Are they like why? Like Dennis suggested earlier, is this like a kind of wild force of madness, or are they more like the sword, deliberate, intentional, ideological? Yeah.
Well, I think I following what you're saying. I think the word is that the biology is consequential. So for me, I think in terms of gun violence, we'll call it the wild beast, the consequential. We're creating an environment in which allows for this to happen. So when I think of the scenario I was imagining attacked by a wild beast, meaning to go out hiking without proper thinking and preparation, you're setting yourself up to be in danger. So I feel the same way with what we're doing now, that by not having proper laws in place, by not thinking through what we're doing, we're creating a series of consequences and making it easier for things to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we won't be able to fully answer this question, a couple more answers, but I'm doing this thinking myself, when I think about how do we speak about these events, how do we reflect on them, I myself am struggling with my own feeling that there's something crazy about this, something unreadable about this madness, and on the other hand, being able to recognize certain kinds of ideas and strategies that do course through these attacks. And we have different conversations after each of them, like, oh, this person was crazy, and therefore you can write it off as an act of wildness or madness. Oh no, but this one was much more deliberate and planned, and you can see this Facebook post. Okay, so take a couple more reflections.
Just real quickly then, a healthy lion, a healthy tiger, a healthy bear does not kill for the sake of killing. It's almost disrespectful to the animals to compare a mass shooter to animals. The animals only kill if A, they feel threatened and they're defending their young, or they're hungry. The mass killers kill because they kill. So I see them as vitally, enormously different.
That's interesting. There's a way in which some of the comments here are suggesting that there's actually something more predictable about the wild animal. Like the wild animal is acting in a way that you can understand, whereas the human violence is in some ways more perplexing, more like an act of madness. Or that's an interesting way to pick up. I think I saw another hand in the back. Or just
right. In response, the Netanyahu seems to be spoken from the perspective of a potential victim of any of these forces. And I don't know that in the eyes of the potential victim or the loved ones of the potential victim it terribly matters whether the bear or lion was acting by instinct or out of malice. It all sort of comes to the same in terms of the violence that we are vulnerable to in the universe.
So this is the and I want to say, even as I frame it this way, that there's no formula here. I don't mean to say that we're going to finally understand how to reflect on these acts of horror, or even to understand exactly what's meant by the piyut here. But I do want to think about the way that the victim, right? In this case, the author of the piyut, the victim, reflects on these two categories and whether there is one that is somehow. What are the two different experiences? Is one more devastating than the other? Are they devastating in different ways? Is it no comfort whether it happens through an act of madness, nature, or an act of design human hatred. Okay, so I want to, we've done, I think, a pretty good job of thinking about the terms as they appear in this view, but I want to try to go a little deeper by just thinking about the terms as they appear in the sort of rabbinic consciousness. Because someone said earlier there's a lot of alliteration here in this piyut, and it's true. Someone else is teaching on mi yanuah mi yanuach, right? That sounds similar. But the cherev and chaya couplet is distinct in that the same letter is picked, right? There's a real alliteration there. A lot of the other alliteration is formed by classic verb forms. But this, like cherev and chaya, is like meant to have a poetic echo. It's meant, there's something literary about the formulation. And so I think that it's worth thinking about, well, what literary echoes are intended here? Like how do these terms bespeak larger phenomena that the Jewish mind, that the Jewish tradition has been processing? And we already said that cherev is like a full category. We understand the sword to come up again and again as the sort of the classic implement of war. So I'd like to take a minute, though, to ask, what about the wild animal? Who gets attacked by wild animals? What's the reference by thinking about wild animals?
Well, that's where I think it sort of ties actually into your previous question in some way, because the hard part about wild animals is that there's not a discriminating piece. I mean, yes, you have to wander in the animal's habitat, but in the era in which this was being written, people lived near enough to most potential animals' habitat that it could be just, you'd be going about your business, doing whatever you need to do, and you could, if you happen to wander into just the wrong place, be taken by the wild animal. If that animal was hungry, or you mistakenly felt like mistakenly felt like you were threatening it, you could wander into your death. And I think that for me, that's what resonates so much when we think at least about how things are going with guns. Ironically, even though they are human implements, is that from the perspective of these victims, no one should have to think about going to Walmart or going to shul or going to wherever. It's not like I'm saying, oh, I'm wandering by the security fence in Israel and doing something that potentially could be perceived as threatening, where I might be, even though it's not intentional, I could be doing something that truly I shouldn't be there. I'm just going about my life, and the attack seems completely wanton and completely random.
Okay, so again, we see there are elements of these two categories that we can associate or identify with there are certain kinds of violence that seem to be that can either be narrated as intention and ideology or as a kind of wild force. So let's pause on that. We'll return to sort of reflect on that. I want now to try and do some of that kind of lexicographical work, like a sort of literary investigation here, and think about these terms. Okay, cherev, we'll put aside for a second. I can name lots of stories of people that die by cherev in Jewish tradition, in Jewish literature. Are there any stories of anyone who dies by a wild beast? Who dies by a wild beast? Anyone?
There's a pretend story.
There's a pretend story, right. The classic story is actually a story about someone who doesn't die by a wild beast, but is said to have died by a wild beast, and that is Joseph. Okay? So let's, in as much as the author here has created a kind of like literary structure, and one has to wonder, or at least I wonder, whether there are certain kinds of literary tropes that are echoing in his ear that he might be referenced. So I'm not going to claim that this is what the author of Natana Tokef definitely was thinking about, but it is at least a helpful literary framework to reflect on these categories. So I want to do just that. I want to turn, and if you'll turn the page, to the story of Joseph's being eaten by a wild, or torn apart by a wild beast. Okay, and it turns out, as we know, that Joseph was not torn apart by a wild beast. But let's look at what that category represents as it emerges for the first time in our tradition. Rebecca, would you read this first piece from Bereshit 37?
In English
In English, but yeah, English is fine.
They saw him from afar, and before he came close to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes that dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we can say, 'An evil beast devoured him.' We shall see what comes of his dreams." Then they took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a kid, and dipped the tunic in the blood. They had the ornamented tunic taken to their father, and they said, "We found this. Please examine it. Is it your son's tunic or not?" He recognized it and said, "My son's tunic, an evil beast devoured him." Joseph was torn apart.
Okay. In a different crowd, I would like give you the whole context. I would like build the story up, but you know what's going on here. Joseph and the dreams, and he's obnoxious, and his brothers hate him, and favoritism, and all of that stuff. And then he goes, to find his brothers, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it makes me think of it. So it's being used as a cover, because that was the context in which it's being used. And it's interesting because I think in terms of gun violence, instead of attacking the issue head on, I feel like there's a lot of, let's focus on this. It's not the guns. Don't worry about it. It's something else. And to me, it seems a parallel here that they're saying the brothers aren't saying it's our jealousy, it's our hatred, it's the way our flaws, the way we fall short. It's a wild beast. So.
Okay, great. You're making a parallel between the way that we might mistakenly perceive an act to be chaotic when it's not, and the actual intent, the attempt to frame this act as if it were an act of wild chaos. In this case, it's a strategy. They are going to kill him. They're going to, inflict him with the sword. In this case, not a sword, but they're going to kill him. They intend to. They say, they want to kill him. But their intention from the start is to make this seem like an accident. Why? Yeah.
I think the key word is evil. As was brought up by the surfer, right? Animals only kill if they're hungry or if they feel threatened. There's no such thing as an evil animal.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So the fact that both they say an evil beast devoured him, and then Jacob says, "Oh, an evil beast must have attacked them." They're like playing a game here. There's no such thing as an evil beast.
It's a very strange word, actually. Chayara. When I got the translation, copied and pasted it and all that, I changed it because the translation was actually a wild beast. And a wild beast devoured him. But I don't know if evil's the right word either, because you could, we could translate it as like terrible beast or something, but it's unusual this usage here. Chayara. A wicked beast. I don't know if we can go that far, but there is something strange about that phrasing, as if the Torah is suggesting, or the brothers are suggesting, but somehow we're meant to say there's something of, though this is an act of kind of nature, there's a feeling of evil. There's a feeling that this has a trace of a killing. Yeah.
I also think there's another parallel that I haven't thought of before with the whole idea of they say it's an evil beast, slaughter a kid, or they slaughter like an innocent young animal that does not have the same ability to even fight back and take the easiest thing to kill to get to blood and use it. And it's a lot of the same way that we look at whole gun violence, right? Whether or not there's mental health issues in this country, forcing everything to be about mental health when it's about the gun itself is blaming another group for what's going on, right? It's a redirection that wasn't necessary at all. If they're going to kill him, why do they slaughter the animal? But instead they had to do it because they ended up not killing him. So this innocent creature that wasn't by any means a part of it at all, and wasn't probably large enough to defend itself, ends up being what's used to push the agenda further.
Yeah, great. Okay, so it's an interesting first appearance of the wild animal, right? Because the wild animal in this story is not real. The wild animal is a cover for something that's extremely strategic, that was intended from the start, and why do we have all these details? They took Joseph's tunic, they slaughtered a kid. So I think Dan is saying quite rightly, it's so deliberate, so planned out, and yet the idea that this could all be written off as just like, crazy things happen in the world. It's like, that's interesting. I'm also thinking, just in looking at the details, about the phrase here, before he came close, they conspired to kill him. What do you make of that detail? What's that? Just premeditation, right, yeah.
There's something else that's really interesting. I remember being in rabbinical school, when they look at Esau, instead of calling him Adam Hara, with the adjective after, they say he's a Bara Adam. He's a beast that's disguised as man. Look at the text.
Right. I think you small prop, I think, right? Yeah, that's right. This is like a human being can be described as wild. Right? So that's good. I should have included that because that's a good example of how we can imagine that a human act has a kind of wildness to it, and that's how I can ask the question, like, are these attacks that we're seeing today are in one category? They're obviously in the sword category, right? It's a human being using a weapon to kill, and yet there is this feeling that like there's something, and if it's a person who's unbalanced, it's easier to say, well, it's more like an animal who doesn't know what they're doing. But in this case, again, it's not that there's a wildness to the human act, it's that the wildness is used as a kind of screen for the human act.
Yeah, but that's looking at the person who's perpetrating these, right? So I think that's where I'm still getting caught up, is going back to this, you say obviously it's the sword. It's only if we take the time to care about the person who gets up to school, right? Whereas if you don't care, I don't want to know more details about their life, then maybe it is more wild animal the way everyone is screaming and running.
Okay, so with that, let's turn to the victim. In this case, Joseph is the victim, but in this case also Jacob is the survivor, right? So we've been thinking about how the brothers use the wild animal motif. How do you think it lands with Jacob? I mean, how does he feel? It feels awful, but is there some way in which, is it better or worse for him that his son died by wild beast? Like, is there some then had been like murdered in a pit, or so, in this case he didn't die at all, so that's definitely better. But is there something like, how does Jacob, do you think, meant to experience that news? What is the feeling of it for him? Yeah, that.
I'm struck by the fact that he is the first one to go towards identifying it as a wild beast, as opposed to having it told to him.
Yeah.
Right, so that
it screams to the echoes that exact phrase, Hayad Ra.
Right. Just as Michelle said, they're playing the same game, right? That none of them can really, or at least Jacob can't fathom the idea that would there be foul play here. And it's much easier for him to, instead of looking at that evil in the face, he's going to push it to the side because it's easier to deal with. He's got his own pain to deal with. He can't deal with the underlying causes at the same time.
So in some sense, it's better is obviously the wrong word here, but there's something, it's easier to cope with the idea of chaos than intentional killing. No,
if that chaos comes to your door, yeah, it's easier if that chaos came to your door chaotically as opposed to it was there.
I'm hearing murmurings of disagreement, yeah?
Well, I think you're right. I don't know what the right kind of aftermath word is. It's comforting. I think the sense is that there's no next step in a good way. If someone says to you, the doctor says to you, there's literally nothing you could do, or there's no second step you could have done, or there's no cure out there, you always try to grasp at hope, and you're always asking yourself, what could I have done? And in this sense, there's nothing he could do, and there's no vengeance. He can't go run after the murderer. He's just there to cope with his grief.
So it may be...
Not that it's better.
Right, not better, but maybe it may be helpful device in at least in as much as it relieves everyone of responsibility. And there's no rethinking, there's no next step. This is just a way of where you can't plan for an animal attack. Notwithstanding what we said earlier about like being in the right situation. But then it becomes much more about caution than about a conflict.
Well, I think the thing that's easy for Jacob is to think something like this happened rather than looking at his own responsibility, which is that he favored a kid and made the others feel unloved, actually until the very end of the story. And, you know, he's sort of not learned a whole lot so far in his life after everything that he went through. So it's a lot easier to say, oh, it's back to the gun thing. Oh, it's not about the guns, it's not about, the rhetoric, it's not about what happens to people who feel isolated and outcast. It's about violent video games. That's what did it. Let's stop selling those.
In other words, there is actually an explanation here. Like, we can look at this death, or this kidnapping, right? We could find there's even more to uncover, that it's not a death at all. But we could trace this violence back. We can think about the sources of it, understand the dynamics, understand how we have contributed Jacob has contributed to those dynamics, right? But the attempt of the brothers and Jacob maybe is inclined to, he's being presented this, but maybe there's even a way in which he would like to just give in to this idea that, oh my gosh, this is beyond anything we can try. It happened. It's madness.
Sent his kid out to the 11 brothers, or the 10 at this point. He sent it out there in an isolated environment after doing all that favoritism, so he could have thought about what that might be.
Okay, I see one more thing, and then we're going to push forward to our last piece.
Let's build on that. If you're a parent in today's world and you send your child to school, how do you not think about the potential for mass violence? We all practice active shooter drills. So as a parent, you think, did I put my child in harm's way by sending them to school today? Jacob put his son in harm's way. I totally agree with you. He put his son, knowing that his brothers were a danger to him, he put his son in harm's way. That it was a wild beast that killed him absolves everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody can go to sleep that night.
Okay, and I'm sure there are various and contradictory thoughts out there. So let's keep them in mind. But I want to take one last move, which is to say it's worth trying to come up with, and a bunch of rabbis in the room can do it, where someone is attacked by a wild beast purportedly. It's easier to think about examples of the sword, but who is the first? What is the first sword killing in the Torah? There are other swords. The angels outside of Gan Eden have a sword, but what is the first actual sword killing mentioned? Cain is not killed with a sword, though he's killed. That's the first killing. Pinchas, stabs, and this earlier.
Shimon
and Levi, right? Just 3 chapters back. So let's take a look at this just as one last, because this is the same family, same story here. Okay, Michelle, would you read this piece for us? Jacob's sons.
Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor, speaking with guile, because he had defiled their sister Dinah, and said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for that's a disgrace amongst us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become like us, in that every male among you is circumcised."
Okay, so there's a setup here. We know the backstory, which is that they're disgusted with the very fact that their sister's been abducted in this way, taken by these people that they consider, I guess, heathens. But they've got a plan here, right? You can already hear that they are speaking with guile, the mirma. Okay, would you continue?
So on the 3rd day, when they were in pain, Shimon and Levi, 2 of Jacob's sons, brothers of Dinah, took each his sword, came into the city safely, and slew all the males. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword, took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went away.
Okay, let's be IKAR, right? They came in with swords. This is it. This is a real sword attack, not one that is purported to happen, one that really happened. We're not going to go as deep into this, but just as a way of providing backdrop to the wild animal story that we've been looking at, how are these stories? What is similar about these two stories? guile, premeditation, right? There's an intent to do something. Same players, right, who want to kill, but come up with a strategy, come up with deception. So that ends up being a theme that runs through these two stories. How now that we know that Shimon and Levi are men of the sword, killers in this way, how does that add to the other story we were looking at? How does that inform the Joseph episode? Yeah.
I think there's distance in the first story that the brothers don't want Jacob to know that they were actually the reason for this happening, that they got rid of their brother in a certain way, and that in the second story, they are very proud of the fact that they want to be behind that sword. And so there's something, relational isn't the right word exactly, but there's something that kind of takes on that responsibility piece of standing behind the sword and saying, this is something I'm willing to stand behind. This action is something I'm willing to take ownership of and responsibility for. Whereas in the first story, the brothers want it to happen, but don't want to be accused for what has happened.
It's almost like the motivation behind each action is different, and it also affects the level of premeditation, right? Before Joseph comes close, they can still see him. They know he's approaching, and like within minutes, have an idea. This is days, right? This is, we're going to make sure that none of them can fight back, right? This is a whole different level of premeditation, and I think it has to do with the brothers have an issue that they want to solve. Then with the sword, Shimon and Levi are angry, and they're zealous, right, at this point. So they want the credit for doing this thing in the name of what was right. So that level of like desire, what they want out of the killing, is also very different.
Okay, great. So it is true, and I think you're both right to say there's something much more strategic, planned. There's an orchestrated killing here, and in that sense, it's quite distinct from the Joseph story in that it all seems to happen in an instant, and yet it is important to remember then that they're killers. Like they're primed, they know what it is to have killed, and they have done it through deceit. They're primed to deceive as well. So there's something that's much more immediate and in a sense chaotic about what happens to Joseph, but there's a backdrop of like these people are all like they know this art, right? They're practiced in both the art of killing and in the art of deception. Let's take a couple more thoughts and we have to close.
Just a couple of thoughts. One is, it's interesting that the one that comes right after V'cher is Barab. And again, you're thinking of Joseph. If you think of Joseph, you're saying, on one hand, Ra'av sounds like act of God. But if you start thinking about Joseph, you realize even Ra'av, there's an ability that human beings have to control for a famine. And sort of like the whole question of Ulkan Tophet is, do we have any control or are we helpless? And it just seems to be running through the whole poem is about wanting to believe that we have control and willing, so whether it's, do we have control over divine judgment, or do we have control over Mother Nature, or do we have control over our own actions so that we can avert, human judgment?
That's a part of these stories, is also, and as you're saying, it's also a part of our reckoning right now. How much of this can we actually map out? How much can we just change laws and things will be like, what is going on here?
And I think spiritually, chaos is much harder for us. And we'd much rather accept guilt than we would to accept helplessness. This just happened. You're going to die. It doesn't matter what you do. You're going to die. And we have a human need to believe, I could have averted it. If only we would have done this, we could have solved this, we could have solved that. But, on a larger scale, we're all going to die. There's nothing you can do to learn that. We're all going to die.
I just think one last question.
I can't add to that beautiful insight, but I wonder if we can learn, when Jacob actually gives his blessing at the end. And I never just now look now, it's fascinating language, right? Shimon v'Levi achim, klei chamas mechorotehem. There seems to be already a definition somehow or an opening of klei chamas. And since here that in the commentary mechorotehem, it's actually a hapax legami, that it's like never used before and they don't know how to translate it. And they translate it here as lawlessness.
Yeah. This is great. Might as well mention this because I also was sort of just trying to think about whether these stories, like once you start to see a connection between stories, for rabbis, you wonder like, was this? And it's better if someone said it before, right? So that using that exactly that phrase from the blessing of Jacob, Shimon and Levi Achim, they were the brothers. The Targum Yonasan here suggests exactly this, that when in verse 19 they said to one another, here comes that dreamer, the they, Targum Yonasan assumes, is Shimon and Levi, who were Achim be'itaka. They were brothers in conspiracy, right? In other words, they knew they were prime. They had become these kinds of killers, and then they were ready to, and they were all, and they did it through deception. They were ready to do that again. So obviously, as I said at the start, there's no formula here, and I assume we will ourselves lean in different ways in how we account for, or make sense of, or give meaning to, or comfort to these episodes as they keep happening. We've been talking about them all year, but to whatever extent that this sort of terror is in our consciousness as we head into the holidays, I want to just review a little bit of the way that these two terms, the way that we've spoken them out, present in some ways two possibilities for reflection. The one, in the Chaya category, gives voice to the feeling of chaos, of madness, of kind of helplessness that does course through our community after these episodes happen. But the Cherev, right, in conversation with it, also reminds us that we should be alert to strategies and designs and ideologies and intentions and the reasons behind these things. And once the categories are put in conversation, both by the author of this piyut, but maybe by the Torah itself, then we have this other lens of analysis, which is that when we see forces of chaos, when we see the catastrophic just happen and it seems to us madness, it seems to us like an eruption, we should look deeper. We should continue to analyze, because the classic story of the wild beast wasn't a wild beast at all. There were reasons. There was a motive. We could make sense of it, and even though it is important to give feeling to the madness, maybe that is a voice we also need to represent. It's worth our wondering, how these categories blur together. I assume Rabbi Amnon of Mainz must have felt that there was something mad about what was happening, something wild about what happened to him. But then again, it all made sense. Right? It was anti-Semitism. It was intentional violence. It was a lot of the forces that we are still contending with today. So I'll leave it there just with these reference points. We are all rabbis, and we can make meaning of them as we will. So thank you for